Last week I told you guys that I was going to be diving into a more separate series of talking about which melee classes, which range classes, which healers, or maybe even which tanks are best in the PvP sphere right now for 7.3. For those who don't know me, my name is Michael Hogman. I make a lot of guides and I keep people up to date with World of Warcraft news. So just diving into it, this specific video is going to be about the melee classes and which classes in Arena are doing much better than other classes and why. I'm actually going to just list this off in a format that's going to be my choices for the top classes and just talk about why they're doing so well, and also talk about a couple classes that maybe aren't doing so well and why, right? So the very first one that I want to talk about is actually the best one that has been represented on the 3 versus 3 ladder, right? So that means that this class has been seen more so at the top of the ratings in comparison to previous seasons, right? And the very first one I'm going to talk about is going to be the Feral Druid. So the Feral Druid had a pretty significant rework whenever 7.3 came out. There was a lot of different changes that pretty much made the Feral Druid feel a lot less clunky and also put out a lot more damage. Since the release of 7.3, since we're a few weeks in now, there definitely have been some nerfs for Feral Druid, but I still think Feral Druid are in a very solid spot, and I think that the other classes that are strong, which I'll get into in my healer and range classes, those classes really do complement the Feral Druid in the playstyle and the way it does damage. So Feral Druid, they really thrive in doing spread pressure, they really thrive in putting out a bunch of bleeds and dots on several targets, being very fast, having just a lot of movement speed, and if they need to, they can shift into bear form and survive, right? So they're more so of a tanky, but the amount of damage that they put out right now, and the classes that they synergize with, who are also good, it makes sense for the Feral Druid to be one of the best classes, if not the best melee class out there, in my opinion. And I think that overall Feral Druid are going to see a huge amount of success right now until they get nerfed damage-wise. Or until Rogue Mage becomes very, very strong in the meta. Because Rogue Mage is pretty much the counter to Feral Druid. So like when Feral Druid wants to use Incarnation, Rogue Mage will blind them and sap them. And that'll ruin their whole offensive cooldown. Or, just in general, like the setups and the CC and the burst damage on a Feral Druid, basically you get through the 2 charges of Survival Instincts and Feral Druids just die. So that's kind of how Feral Druid will rise through the meta. Right now they're doing really well, but when Rogue Mage becomes good again, if they get some buffs or whatever, whatever shifts through the meta that makes Rogue Mage good, that in turn will make Feral Druids weaker and kind of balance them out a little bit, because they'll have like a counter. But right now there's not a whole lot of counter for that. And then the next class I want to talk about is actually going to be the Demon Hunter. So I played this class pretty significantly right now. I played it to Glad last season, and I had a lot of fun with it. And I think that I have a pretty solid understanding of why Demon Hunter is doing well now compared to previous seasons and why they're seeing more play. They were very, very relevant in the most recent tournaments for PvP Arena, and I think right now they're doing very well for a few reasons. The very first reason, and this is probably the biggest reason, the main reason, is that they're very versatile. Like, they can actually play so many different specs, and this is something I'm actually making a Demon Hunter guide for you guys so that you can dive into this more deeply. But these specs, like, you can play like basically a ranged DPS spec where you have like Fabrage and a couple other things, Bloodlet and Fell Eruption and all these things. And you're basically like a range class that just puts out your damage from range, which means you don't have to be in melee range, and that helps you keep up with classes that are faster than you. And then you can play stuff like Nemesis Chaos Blades, which isn't seen a whole lot right now, but Nemesis Chaos Blades allows you to have a bunch of burst single target damage in a 15 to 30 second window, right? And that is, like, those are just 2 specs, but then there's also another spec that's been discovered in this recent month and a half or so, and that's actually the Demonic spec. So the Demonic spec allows you to be very, very durable while also getting out the same amount of damage. It allows you to survive through a lot of rot pressure, such as people that play Feral Druid, say Affliction Warlock or Feral Druid Shadow Priest, whatever. You're able to survive a lot better through those types of damage, but when you play that spec, you don't do so well against burst damage. So because you don't have like Desperate Instincts, you play with Soul Rending. And having this like versatility through the Demon Hunter class, I feel like really helps, because there is kind of a lot of diversity throughout the game right now. You can play against Cleaves pretty often, you can play against rot comps, you can play against burst comps like RMP. There's a lot of that kind of happening on the ladder right now. Some comps obviously shine more than others, and that's why you see them at the top of the rating, but you still do see a lot of people playing RMP and Cleaves and whatnot. And that's why I feel that the Demon Hunter is really strong. And since you're seeing a lot of these like rot comps, these double caster comps, Shadow Priest Warlock, Shadow Priest Destruction Warlock at that, what's really cool about the Demon Hunter is that the artifact weapon actually gives you 16% reduced magical damage taken, which helps you be a little bit more durable whenever you're fighting these comps. So I feel that the Demon Hunter really thrives against that, and that's why I feel that it's one of the stronger characters right now. Okay, so now I want to dive into one other class that is kind of like in between. Like, they're good, but they're, you know, they're kind of not good at the same time. They have counters. Maybe that's balanced. And that's going to be the Subtlety Rogue. So the Subtlety Rogue has the most amount of stuns in the game, in my opinion. They're able to cheap shot and kidney shot and blind and sap and do all the things that they want to do on a regular basis very consistently. But they actually just got a really interesting nerf not too long ago, which made it so that rogues have a significantly lower chance to dodge in arena combat. And I thought that was really interesting because whenever melee cleaves, or, you know, people with melee in general would fight against rogues would never really be the kill target because it would always be so hard to kill them through feint, through their passive dodge, through their 1 minute evasion cooldown, their Cloak of Shadows, whatever it is. They have so many cooldowns and so many passive things. Them being nerfed in that passive dodge actually makes it so that the consistent pressure melee cleaves, or the consistent damage melee players in general, are able to stick on a rogue, get through their cooldowns, and eventually kill them, which I feel that wasn't really possible before. So that's why I feel like Subtlety Rogues are right there in between. I think that they can be very good, and they can counter comps very well, but they can also be countered and just be kind of like pile drived over, which kind of, you know, it makes me understand that you know, that's kind of like how the Subtlety Rogue class should be, in my opinion. I feel like they should be the most fragile class of all of the melee because they're rogues. They're not like plate-wearing, you know, Death Knights or something like that. They're meant to be a little bit fragile. And now I want to dive into, in my opinion, the two classes I want to talk about that I feel like are worth talking about. And in terms of like controversy, if I don't mention your class, don't think that it's like awful. Just think that, you know, maybe it's not being talked about a whole lot right now because this is more about the current meta. So the last two classes I want to talk about they're going to be the Retribution Paladin, which had a lot of controversy, and in my last video where I talked about the best classes, Ret Paladin came up because it actually is very good in a certain meta. And I've understood this because Retribution Paladins have a few things that really do help fighting against melee cleaves. Blessing of Freedom, Sanctuary, Blessing of Sanctuary, I think that's what it's called. And then also, they like most of their abilities are like Divine Storm or Blade of Justice. Like, those things are more so AoE capable. And fighting against 2 or even 3 targets that are very close proximity, that's where Retribution Paladins really thrive, is being able to do a huge amount of AoE damage in a melee capacity, and that means that they're going to just put out so much damage that a team really can't survive so well. And you know, since my last video, I feel that the melee cleave meta has kind of shifted out because of the strength of Shadow Priest, the strength of Destruction Warlock, Feral Druids, Affliction Warlock. Like, all those classes are doing really well right now, and that's kind of making it so that these melee cleaves are kind of dying down. And if melee cleaves are dying down, then so does the relevancy of Ret Paladins. And that's just something I wanted to point out because I feel like it's important. I don't want to disappoint all you Ret Paladin players, but it's just kind of how it is, and I'll keep you updated if something changes or if, you know, however that dynamic changes in general. And the last class I do want to talk about is actually going to be the Death Knight. It's going to be the Frost Death Knight. And this class is really easy to explain. The Death Knight in general, Unholy Death Knight's seen a lot of play this expansion, but the Frost Death Knight, not really. And that's because it was nerfed so much after that whole Chill Streak nerf. You know, that ability that would bounce back in between 2 or 3 people. That ability got nerfed into the ground, right? And that was like the main ability because you would play, say, with a Windwalker Monk and a Frost Death Knight, and whenever the Frost Death Knight would grip in a target, that means 2 targets were in close proximity. They'd use their Chill Streak, it'd bounce back and forth, do a ton of damage. Whenever that Chill Streak was nerfed, it actually doesn't really quite, you know, matter anymore. And since then, Frost Death Knights have gotten a buff in damage, but I really feel that the Frost Death Knight, like, it's only way to compete is if its damage is relevant in the meta, or if like their damage is a little bit stronger. I feel that the Frost Death Knight in particular is in a weird place right now, because last expansion, Blizzard's thought process and design philosophy over the Frost Death Knight was that it was a little bit more immobile of a class. It didn't have a whole lot to keep up with like Windwalker Monks or like Demon Hunters or whatever. Obviously Demon Hunters were in the game last expansion, but like Subtlety Rogues or, you know, whatever, right? They couldn't keep up as much, but they had a lot more damage. And I think that that is true. But then, you know, they were introduced into Legion, and I feel that like with the introduction of like Wraithwalk and having like all the tools that they had before, it doesn't seem like Blizzard is really keeping to the point that Death Knights are supposed to be more of an immobile class with a higher amount of damage, and that's why I think you guys saw such a lull in your overall like damage power, and that's why Frost Death Knights really didn't have a whole lot before then. They've had the same amount of defensive capabilities, you know, not a whole lot really, and they just didn't have the damage to keep up with other classes, to be honest. And I think that Blizzard should really look into Frost Death Knights and hopefully add something in soon, whether it's the PvP talents or whatever, then make Frost Death Knights have more of an identity in an arena, because I feel that that class is so defined by how much damage it does, and that's not really what I like. So that pretty much does sum it up for today's video, guys. I hope you did enjoy. I hope I did serve this justice and tell you guys a little bit more about that. One class I didn't mention that I did want to talk a little bit about is the Windwalker Monk, because it is also doing very well in terms of the same stuff as like the Demon Hunter. They just do a huge amount of burst damage, and they're very mobile. That's really the extent of it. But I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to, leave a comment down below with your thoughts on my opinions of this video, or even your own thoughts as to like what classes you're playing that maybe I didn't mention. You can leave a comment down below letting me know exactly why you think it's strong or why you think it's weak, and also give me an opinion of what you think about what I said during this video. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it a big thumbs up, and also subscribe to my YouTube channel for future videos, and I'll see you all next time.